All right, let's begin. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Crowley, and I'll be moderating this panel today. I'm the president of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO and the co-chairman of Climate Jobs Rhode Island. And welcome to our noontime panel, which is titled From Federal Hill to Federal Court, which is, I thought, was a very Rhode Island way of thinking about what we're going to talk about today. We have an esteemed panel assembled for you today, and I'm going to start by asking everyone to introduce themselves. I'm going to start at my far right with Nick Ucci. Why don't you start? Say who you are and what organization you may represent.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Nick Ucci. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Rhode Island Energy, and in that role, I help oversee all of our policy and legislative engagement. Been in this role about 4 years, and before that, I spent 20 years in public service, culminating in being named State Energy Commissioner under Governor Raimondo and Governor McKee. So great to be here today.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Terry Gray. I'm the director of the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. I've been director for almost 5 years now, but before that, I had a long career with the department, mostly working in environmental protection programs. I'm also chair of the governor's Executive Climate Change Coordinating Council, so a lot of work on both reducing our greenhouse gases, but also the resiliency work to prepare Rhode Island for the impacts of climate change.
Good afternoon. Chris Kearns, Acting Energy Commissioner with the Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources. We're directly involved with a number of the state energy-related incentive and policies and programs.
Good afternoon, everybody. Harry Antone. I am the Labor Liaison and Offshore Wind Coordinator at Climate Jobs Rhode Island.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Nybo. I'm Senior Legal Counsel for Revity Energy. We are a distributed generation solar developer located in Warwick, Rhode Island. We have developed 147 megawatts of solar in the state to date.
Well, great. Thank you, everyone, for that. So the nature of our conversation today is talking about the legal landscape that renewable energy in particular, but really all energy sectors across Rhode Island are facing given the changes in administration in Washington, D.C., and how that may impact the work that you are involved in, both in terms of your industry, but also in government and in future green energy development. So I think we're going to have a nice, robust conversation about a number of different things. I want to start by saying, I don't know how many folks watching or maybe know this, but the AFL-CIO is actually the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit that's been filed in federal court against the Trump administration on the Solar for All program. And I thought that might be a good place to start. And Chris Kearns, I may call on you to maybe explain what the Solar for All program is, and then from your perspective, where things stand in terms of the relationship with the federal government and the court proceedings that are ongoing.
Yeah, so Rhode Island was fortunate enough to receive, I think, roughly a $49 million Solar for All grant in the summer of 2024. That was going to be focused on both community solar project development here in the state, but also rooftop solar installations within income-eligible households in different parts of the state. We worked aggressively over the summer of 2024 into the end of the year, and were legally awarded and secured those funds. And the team was taking the next steps to implement those funds and the milestones in the first part of the new year into the spring, early summer. And then, unfortunately, we received the notification last August that those funds were being illegally terminated, which ultimately triggered the lawsuit that AFL-CIO and a lot of states are involved with, including Rhode Island. I had to file our declaratory statement on that issue, and right now it is in current litigation. Pat, you may know more of the details, but my understanding is it's in two respective courts, a district court, and then I think a court in terms of contract disputes. And I think one of the questions beyond the legality of the termination is which venue should hear the case. So I think that is all ongoing. Unfortunately, as we know, with a lot of federal litigation, it's probably several months to a year before we know the outcome.
Indeed. I mean, I am just a Zamboni driver. I'm not a lawyer, but I've come to learn quite a bit about the intricacies of federal court proceedings. So it's been an interesting journey. Before we move on, Kristen, there's a lot of background noise with the group on the outside. If we could just maybe close the door, it might be easier for folks to hear. Director Gray, I know from your role and the Department of Environmental Management, there's also been a lot of reaction to some of the changes in the federal landscape in your office, and what are you seeing, and what kind of changes have been impactful for the work that you and your team have been doing?
Thanks, Pat. I think most of our major program changes have been through the changes in the Clean Air Act implementation, and that has a direct nexus a lot to clean energy. And the Trump administration has backtracking off a lot of really strong clean air rules. The biggest one probably was the advanced clean, or the waiver that allowed us to follow the state of California and adopt the advanced clean car regulations and the advanced clean truck regulations. In terms of climate emissions, the transportation sector is the largest one in Rhode Island. And the ability to really move and accelerate the transition to EVs would really not only create a big gain in our progress towards reducing those emissions, but also some big health gains for people that live near some of our more congested highways. That was a big one. The other piece that we're involved with is litigation against the administration because EPA changed what's known as the endangerment finding. And this is the basic regulatory determination that carbon emissions and climate change are impacting human health and the environment. There are volumes and volumes of science that prove that fact, but EPA rescinded that endangerment finding earlier this year.
Thank you for that. Nick Ucci, you represent the state's largest utility operator in Rhode Island. And I know one of the things we talked about at an earlier panel today was the importance of stability in the industry and in the workforce. I'm just wondering, what do you see from your seat the impacts of the changes in federal direction and how that might impact the work that Rhode Island Energy is engaged in?
That's a great question, Patrick. I mean, we did hear about it quite a bit today, but I think, the pivot from the federal government on offshore wind is a critical challenge for all of us, probably in each of our respective roles. For the company, it's our job to help the state achieve its policy goals and to do so safely, affordably, and reliably. And we've been, I think, a good partner with the state and many other organizations in trying to achieve that. But we were all banking on offshore wind. And when these policies were set, and I was there for some of that, working for the state, very ambitious policies to set Rhode Island apart as a national leader is something we should all be proud of. But we had all hung our hat, by and large, on continued growth in local solar, but really, offshore wind development at scale, with a 45 to 50% capacity factor, meaning it's, producing power about half the time it's out there, producing that power, particularly during the winter, which, as many of us know, eventually this New England energy system is going to shift to a winter peaking system. As people electrify their vehicles, as people electrify their heat, we're going to see loads or energy demand in the winter months increase significantly over time. And offshore wind happens to be the best distributed resource we have that is carbon free and maximizes its output when we're going to need it the most. So, I think that this is a real moment. I know we all sort of wring our hands, including us at the company, because we value these resources for all the energy system benefits that they can provide, as well as the environmental benefits and the benefits to our local economy. And so we're all wringing our hands. What can we do? What can we do? We're sort of powerless because of the changes in Washington. Well, there are things I think we can be doing. I think that this is a moment for the state to convene its leaders, to convene labor, to convene industry, to convene the utility and state agencies, to figure out where else can Rhode Island move the needle? How can we ensure that Rhode Island is ready so that when the administration changes, when the policy at the federal government begins to shift, that we're ready. Not that we're just ready, that we're ahead of our neighbors as best as we can be, that we have all the right local permitting processes in place, that we're streamlining those processes in a way that assures we protect the environment and other interests across industry, but allows that offshore wind project to proceed relatively swiftly. Do we have the right tax policy in place, the right incentives? Are there other things that we could be doing? working with Commerce Rhode Island, working with the administration and legislative leaders to keep Rhode Island at the forefront of this conversation to help reduce ultimately some of the soft costs that are key inputs into how much that offshore wind, how much those offshore wind projects are eventually going to cost consumers. And so that's the sort of conversation I think those are actions we can take today, regardless of what happens in Washington, and conversation we'd be happy to be a part of.
Thank you. Sticking with offshore wind for a minute, Harry, I know in your work you've been intimately involved with some of the workers that were directly impacted by some of the changes regarding offshore wind here in Rhode Island. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what happened in August of 2025 and December of 25 about offshore wind, and then maybe a little bit about how that impacted the workforce that you've been interacting with?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Pat. And it's easy to have a conversation about policies and see numbers and certain rollbacks. But it's another to see a face of a working man or woman say, I don't have a job anymore, or I can't provide for my family. And we saw that multiple times throughout this past year. First coming in August with the first stop work order on Revolution Wind, seemingly with no warning. We had workers stuck on ships not knowing if they could work. They were a bit caught in limbo. We had workers on land not knowing if they were going to go back to work. And then fast forward to the wintertime, to December, when we had stop work order on 5 offshore wind projects throughout this country due to seemingly unprecedented national security concerns that had already been permitted and vetted. And they were told days before Christmas that they didn't have a job anymore. So seemingly a nice time that they should have with their families, that they should be able to buy gifts. They were sent home on shifts. They were caught in limbo. And that's kind of the direct impacts that aren't necessarily always talked about in the news. And it has really been our mission at Climate Jobs to put those stories front and center. Because Andrew Cortez said something impactful earlier today. And he says that he has faith in people. And I think there is optimism behind all of this uncertainty, that with people behind this movement, we can still accomplish things. And we did. We won 6 times in court. And fast forward to today, Revolution Wind is delivering power and is over 90% complete.
Great. And I know Nick Nybo, I'm going to have to keep on referring to Nicks by their last name so I don't get this confused. The company that you work for, Revity Energy, is really one of the most innovative developers in the solar field here in Rhode Island, really across southeastern New England. What kind of impacts are you seeing to your company and to the industry writ large as a result of the changes that are going on in Washington?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. So I have to admit, I feel a bit fraudulent being on this panel because, the Trump administration has been less pernicious to solar than it has to wind, and specifically offshore wind. The big hit we saw was, and I hate to say the name, but I'm just going to have to say it, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I'm going to call it HR 1 moving forward. That rolled back, sunsetted, and stopped the federal investment tax credits that financially justify most solar projects, most wind projects across this country. There were iterations that came out of the Senate and the House were even more catastrophic than what the final version ended up being. There was a pretty generous sunsetting. Generous is not the right word, but there was a sunsetting period, a runway for us to essentially, our projects need to be placed in service by the end of 2027 or begin construction by this July. And this past last summer. So for our business, we have spent much of the last year, trying to understand the IRS's tax guidance about what all of this means, what qualifies as beginning construction, what qualifies as being placed in service, and then 2, making sure that we qualify as beginning construction. There are various ways that you can do that. Various tax lawyers have advised us on what things we can and cannot do to qualify. And so we've really just been spending the last 9 months making sure that the projects that we have invested in and that we have financial partners on and certainly labor partners on are going to qualify even under the HR 1. So that's been our focus.
Chris Kearns and Terry Gray, I want to kind of throw this to both of you because you both sit on, I believe you both sit on, the EC4 for the state. That's the Environmental Coordinating Council that advises the state and Governor McKee on environmental policy and is charged by the 2021 Act on Climate at setting the policy for the state of Rhode Island to meet our very ambitious decarbonization goals. And I'm just wondering, from both of your offices, the work of the EC4, how has that been impacted, in any specific or big picture ways? For example, Chris, I believe I saw in the news this week that OER, and I think it's OER, not DEM, is taking the next step at installing EV chargers across the state. But I also know that there's a real lack of available EVs out in the marketplace. I mean, let's start with you, Chris. From your point of view, how has the work of the EC4 been impacted by the changes that we're seeing from the federal government?
So what I'll do is maybe defer EC4 specific. I can talk about the OER in terms of just the federal dynamics ongoing. One of the things I've said in the last several months, sadly, is that I've been involved with more litigation in the last 13 months than I have in the last 13 years at OER in terms of the various lawsuits that we've been pulled into. I will say that, fortunately, the OER team was pretty proactive, not taking anything to chance in terms of the outcome of the federal election, roughly 2 years ago, in terms of we were legally awarded and secured over $200 million. Pretty much every Rhode Island energy funding source that was available to the state, we secured. We're currently implementing just over $100 million of that funding. So that's the home electrification appliance rebate program. As Pat alluded to, we just announced we got across the finish line and fully awarded $24 million for 100 new EV charging stations across the state. We've launched our New England heat pump grant, which is a $35 million program that provides a rebate to reduce the net cost of heat pump, air source heat pump, and heat pump water heaters. We're going to be hopefully nearing the finish line over the next 30 to 60 days regarding the energy efficiency conservation block grants to towns and cities. Pat will like this particular project, geothermal installation with the city of Newport at I'm drawing a blank on the museum in downtown Newport near the ballpark, but that's nearing the finish line. So we'll, I think, be the first state in the U.S. to complete that program. So we've been very active in terms of trying to get as much of that federal funding out the door into projects. And certainly those are the things that obviously EC4, Director Gray and others, obviously we keep tabs of those things on our monthly meetings amongst the EC4. But Director Gray, I don't know if you have any more to add.
Thanks. When we unpack or try to unpack what the impacts have been on the EC4, it's a pretty complicated answer. But the three-letter word is big impacts, right? And one of the things that we did under the Act on Climate last year is we published the climate action strategy for the state, and that outlined kind of an economy-wide plan of what was necessary in order to achieve the 2030 mandates that are outlined in the Act. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of investment. It's a lot of work that would need to happen in Rhode Island in order to get to that point. And it's not just work by OER and DEM. There's 16 agencies on the EC4, and everybody's got a part. It's either it could be more work by RIPTA, it could be more work by RIDE, it could be resiliency work by RIB or CRMC, and that's just naming some of them. But there's a lot of work there. The easy or the first blush answer, not so much the easy answer, but the first blush answer is to look at the grants. And funding across all these agencies got rolled back and impacted in a lot of different ways. But the secondary thing is look at the policies. Look at the policies, the legal underpinnings, the regulations that we built our strategy on. And a lot of those changed dramatically over the last year, to the point where you look at the strategy and it's a whole different world right now. And I think we need to we need to really kind of regroup and reset and look at what we had planned. And that's something that we're thinking about. We don't have any concrete plans on that yet, but we're thinking about how to look at these plans, and also how to work with our fellow like-minded states. We can't pull this off alone. So I just came back from DC, where I met with a group organized under the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is 24 like-minded states that are all facing the same things we are. So collectively, we're looking at things like working with auto manufacturers to get more inventory for EVs into Rhode Island, looking at different manufacturers for other sort of climate-friendly type appliances, and really trying to see, all right, there's got to be a better way to come at this. It's still a work in progress.
Okay, Patrick. So, I mean, one thing that, again, Director Gray and his team, and certainly the OER team members that were involved, was when you're working on the climate strategy and you start that process, in terms of in 2024, and then you're working through into 2025, navigating strategy report that you're in terms of what's in front of you, what's available to you, and then, a domino in terms of an executive order blocking offshore wind, the repeal of the EV tax credit, the blocking of the clean car regulations that DEM, California, other states were implementing, the first stop work order on the Revolution Wind project, the second stop work order on the Revolution Wind project, the abrupt repeal of the renewable energy tax credit for homeowners. And then obviously, as Nick mentioned, fortunately they gave a little bit of leeway, but the abrupt end of the renewable tax credit for a lot of the commercial solar development. So it was very difficult terrain, kind of navigating state-led efforts that rely on a lot of federal initiatives. Obviously, the unfortunate situation with the endangerment findings. So kind of navigating state-level activities when the foundation is being pulled out underneath you at the federal level.
One thing I just want to add, and it's a message that all of the states really echoed at that U.S. Climate Alliance meeting, is we've survived 1 year of this. We have not necessarily seen the end of it, and we've not necessarily seen the worst of it yet. So that's kind of discouraging, but we cannot kind of take a breather and say, all right, we made it, because we haven't yet. There's a lot more potentially that we're going to have to deal with over the next few years.
Nick Ucci, with the federal government and the state government seemingly to be going in different directions in terms of energy policy, how does the major utility in the state navigate those difficult waters by, maintaining, a viable company that, is interested in, the product that it's delivering, but also has to meet shareholder demands, but has a real complicated path to try to do this in this type of environment? What are some of the steps that the utility is taking to try to figure out the path forward?
Yeah, I mean, look, energy affordability is key, right? I mean, you're not going to get my grandmother to be a participant in this transition unless you can help her make her energy bill more affordable, so that she can also buy, her medicine, buy her groceries for the week. And in order to achieve the goals that our company shares with the state in terms of driving toward a net zero economy, we're going to need people to make, as individual citizens, families, small businesses, to make investments. Some of them pretty expensive investments with high upfront capital costs, and they're going to have to make behavioral changes too. So they'll only do that if they know that they're going to be able to support. So I think that's that should be something that we should all try and focus on, both as government, as investor-owned utility, developers, and labor, because that's the real pathway to success. And I think it's going to necessitate us to, right-size some of our policies, especially in the near term, because of the disruption we've seen in Washington, knowing we're not going to get the capital investment, the incentives that help, bolster industry and their ability to invest. So we're going to have to look at new tools in state on the portions of the bill that we do have some control. Because we're going to need more capital than, Nick's company can bring to the table, than the state government can bring to the table, and probably even that we, if we were allowed to, help the state invest in some of this infrastructure that we could bring to the table. We're going to need all of it and then some. So there's real opportunity here, Patrick, for partnership. We're going to have to find a way to trust one another too, because that's the only way we're going to get to where we're going to go, right? We've got to be able to work with labor, and the majority of our workforce today is organized, and the men and women are out there 24/7, 365 under all sorts of conditions to ensure you don't lose power or gas service. God bless them for the work they do. But we're going to have to find ways to work together, trust one another, because, look, we should not be debating the goal. The goal is not up for debate. The pathway is not like this, though. I know everybody wishes it were. I wish it were, too. But it's not this. It's like this. There's even some roundabouts sprinkled in there as well, which I know we all struggle with as New Englanders. So, we're going to have to sort of retool ourselves, right? Prepare ourselves for when there's a change in Washington coming, and look at new opportunities for investment and to attract the capital needed to build the resources out that will sustain this economy toward net zero by 20.
Thank you for that. One of the other things that we've seen for a number of years, but seems to have been amplified since the change in administration in Washington, is resistance at the local level as well to the change in policies. And maybe it's just a question of things have been thrown up in the air and confused or what. But Harry, I know in your work, you've been at a lot of different community meetings across the state with whether it's a town council or a sub-branch or some other state-based agency. What have you seen out in the community here in Rhode Island since the change in administration, and what people's reactions have been?
It's a great question, Pat. And I want to offer a bit of optimism to this panel right now, because it's hard to see all the threats we have at the federal administration. And what I think back to is, as an organizer and as somebody that works in the community with our rank and file union members, I spend a lot of time conversing with rank and file union members at union halls and at job sites. And as I'm thinking about this panel, I think back to a conversation I had just last week with a rank and file union member who has worked in the offshore wind industry quite some time now, significantly benefited from it, skilled, proud tradesperson. And he said something pretty impactful to me. And what he said was, I am willing to do anything to keep momentum on this work alive, keep it relevant, and to ensure my brothers and sisters continue to benefit from and work in industries like this. And I think that's at the core of what we're talking about around momentum and keeping state level momentum, because the reality here in Rhode Island is we're not starting from zero. We have existing momentum. And have federal actions hindered that a bit? Yes. But it's up for us to respond with our state leaders in partnership to keep that pedal down and to find creative ways to make sure we keep that momentum going.
Pat, can I double down on this optimism right now? As Harry's rousing speech has inspired it in me. Make sure my microphone's on first, though. There you go. Last month, there were two bills introduced in the U.S. Congress. One, a Republican bill, one, a Democrat bill. Both bills would bring back the federal ITC for solar and wind. And I think the Republican bill, the American Energy Dominance Act, of course, and the Democrat bill, Energy Bill Reduction Act. So what I think that reflects is the fact that one of the ingenious aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act was that we saw an unprecedented investment in Republican states. I believe I read where the district in this country that received the most funding from the Inflation Reduction Act was Marjorie Taylor Greene's old district. And so, I would imagine that is not a district where a lot of people believe that climate change is a huge issue, I'm going to guess. But what they saw was a massive investment in their district, in a district where before there had a lot of factories closing, a lot of economic struggles, and you had the largest solar panel developer in the world, Hanwha, go in there and build a factory that employed 10, 20,000 people. And now the OB3 has pulled that all away. And I think that, Texas every year ranks second or third in the country for solar. And it's not because Texans are huge on renewable energy. It's because there's a lot of land, obviously, that's number one. But it's also because, that is a state that believes very firmly in if it's your land, you get to do what you want with it. Now, I'm sure most of them would prefer that people drill for oil on their land, but if you want to build the wind farms and the solar, it's your land, go for it. And they build a ton of solar. So the point is, I think after OB3, a lot of even Republican states looked and said, oh, wait, we just kneecapped what had become kind of a major industry here. And we should really rethink that. So what I see from both these bills that were introduced, I don't think either are going to pass, but I think both sides are recognizing with the midterms coming up that there's going to be a sea change in the House, and each side wants to stake out what its future position is going to be when it comes to renewable energy. And I do think that is going to be, can't go anywhere but up, but I do think pretty quickly we're going to see some positive changes at the federal level being driven by the fact that red states are hurting just as much as blue states are when it comes to abandoning our renewable energy goals.
It's an interesting and probably undiscussed fact in this conversation too often, but when Rhode Island made the decision to pursue offshore wind as an industry, that was actually led by former conservative Republican Governor Don Carcieri at a time when he was an outlier. And to think that, now the party lines, or at least for the last few years, have kind of been drawn on, if you're a Republican, you're against this. If you're a Democrat, you're for that. That's actually more of a recent development in our body politic than I think people realize. And I remember Governor Carcieri, who I was not a fan of, and I think he probably felt likewise about me, but talking about making Rhode Island the Saudi Arabia of offshore wind. And it sounded outlandish at the time, but I think we've come to realize that in our area, from a geographical point of view, we are perfectly poised for that kind of work. And it has been heartening to see, other states, other red state Republican legislators at the federal level, at least, try to recoup some of the benefits that were on their way to being developed. So sticking with that kind of optimistic frame, one question I have for all of you to kind of think of is, what can the state of Rhode Island be doing today to be getting ready for something different in years to come, whether it's a change after the midterm elections, whether it's a change in Washington, whether those things don't matter at all and Rhode Island can just do things regardless of any impact. I mean, we have private industry, we've got government here, we've got labor here, we've got innovative companies here. From your point of view, and I'll offer this to, whoever wants to go first, what steps should Rhode Islanders be exploring today? Go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, I'll start, Pat. And I want to build off something that Nick said earlier. We know how to do a lot of hard things. And we are in a position where we've done a lot of pilot programs in the state. We've established a pretty good foundation of regulations and processes to support things. Offshore wind, perfect example. There's a lot of states that have no idea how to do this. But in Rhode Island, through CRMC's work, we do know how to permit these facilities. The other thing is we've done a lot of work and learned a lot of lessons on electric school buses, electric RIPTA buses. We've learned a lot of very valuable lessons through Chris's programs on how to build a very effective EV charging network across the state. I think a lot of those things are now embedded in our programs to the point where if there is an opportunity to scale them up, we're ready for that. And I think that's a real positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of hopefully we'll have a different outcome at the federal level, in a couple of years. But certainly if and when, we have an equivalent Inflation Reduction Act in terms of federal funding opportunities, obviously we've got solid state programs in place that can leverage those dollars. So again, we've got our EV program, we've got our e-bike program, we have our heat pump incentive programs. We just launched the state's first energy storage standalone incentive program for residential and commercial. We know that technology is going to be the future in terms of its evolution. On the offshore wind subject, we have a solid state law in terms of being able to pull the lever in terms of when that environment becomes more favorable in terms of a federal government that will issue federal offshore wind permits. We know it works because ultimately that was the state law that has resulted in the Revolution Wind Project almost fully operational heading into the end of the year. So I think there are a number of things that we did not have a foundation on, when the Infrastructure and the Inflation Reduction Act laws were passed in 2021, 2022, that we had to start from scratch. I think there will be great opportunities depending on activities in D.C. After the midterms and then the next presidential election that we'll be able to certainly springboard and build off of the programs that we have now.
One other thing I want to add, Pat, and it's something that we're kind of the envy of a few other states, a lot of other states actually, is we have a very quiet but extremely effective green bank here. And the infrastructure bank can take a little money and leverage it out to a lot of money. And they've done an amazing job in a lot of different programs to the point where when we do have an opportunity to invest more money in there, they can leverage it out, get a lot more work done.
Anyone else want to talk about what we could do now to get ready for a potential change in the future?
Well, I think, Chris mentioned energy storage, right? So this, in my view, is sort of what is going to be the next thing for Rhode Island, energy storage. I mean, we're not abandoning our solar plans, but energy storage, we are at a nascent stage here in Rhode Island in energy storage. We're 47th in the country in energy storage. So we have a long way to go. And there's so many benefits to energy storage when it comes to grid resiliency and grid reliability. But we haven't built out what it's going to look like yet. And I think this is an opportunity to learn from some of the lessons and mistakes of how, and also recognize the good things we did in building how we do solar specifically, and trying to replicate the wins and fix any mistakes we made when it comes to energy storage. Because, and one way I view that is, and I'm going to say this while I look at my friends in the environmental community, we need to keep in mind that there are so many economic cases to be made for both renewable energy and energy storage that are not political. Because unfortunately, there is a segment of the population, less so in Rhode Island than other places, but still, that does not buy the environmental argument. But if you can show them why solar ultimately saves money, why energy storage ultimately saves money on their bills, that is a politically agnostic message, in my view. I mean, everybody wants to save money on their electricity bills. So I think that's one area. And, we have so much to learn from the way that we've interconnected solar, the way that we've compensated solar. Have we overcompensated solar? Have we undercompensated solar? We have so much to learn that we should be thinking of applying when it comes to energy storage, because I do think, that is one area that HR 1 did not touch. They didn't change the incentive programs for energy storage. Now, why that is, Elon Musk might have an idea of why that is. But, that is still a very vibrant industry. And Rhode Island has a very long way to go, which it could be a negative thing, but to stay with the optimistic message, it means there's a lot of things for us to do. And so creating the programs in a way that incentivizes us, but does not over-incentivize us to build those grid technologies, I think is something would really look forward to doing.
Well, Chris, you had something you would add.
Just on the storage subject, in terms of thinking ahead, depending on the landscape, over the next few years, one of the things that we're trying to do differently this time around, as we learned with the solar siting issues pre-COVID, is we just put out a drafted kind of guidance model ordinance on energy storage that we're just recently engaged with the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns on at their conference several weeks ago. So we are trying to be a resource education in terms of not only the small scale storage that we are really promoting within the residential and small commercial market, but trying to lay the groundwork where towns and cities have solid information and make informed decisions in terms of adopting potential energy storage ordinances at the local level, because ultimately we'll need town and city buy-in for particularly the bigger projects that we're seeing being proposed in different parts of the state.
You recommended energy storage by right everywhere in the state, right? Is that where I read?
There, but
We can always try to move things along, even when we're on a panel. Harry, I think you wanted to add in?
One more thing as we're thinking about prepping and being prepared for when new things come down. And that is making sure, it's been a theme of a couple different panels today, making sure this isn't a race to the bottom, right? And making sure that as new energy generation sectors start to emerge, that we attach labor standards to every single, and that we make sure that we have apprenticeship utilization on those projects to make sure that the next generation of workers coming into this workforce are signaling to the unions that they can bring in new apprentices to train, to make sure that they can go out to work. That we have things like prevailing wage that ensures that these are high-paying, family-sustaining jobs in every energy sector throughout the state.
Nick Ucci, you want to add anything?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, as I mentioned earlier, I think in terms of offshore wind, you don't just have to sit here and be nervous. I think there's the things that we could be doing as a state, partnering with government, with industry, with labor, and with the utility, ensuring that Rhode Island is ready to rock and roll when this industry starts to come back. And that, I can't emphasize enough some of the concern that I have in terms of when this industry does come back, and it will, what those power costs are going to look like, right? We've lost a lot of momentum. We're going to have to be honest about that, and that's going to lead to higher costs. And I've been in the room. I've seen some of the prices in recent procurements, and the price was going up, not down, and that gets back to affordability. So, making sure that Rhode Island has done everything it can with every lever it's got within reason to smooth the runway for offshore wind to be able to ramp up again. That's one. Two. We can't connect, 20,000 solar systems as we've done. We can't support offshore wind as we want to and decarbonize the economy and do it without new resources that are dispatchable and, in essence, based, ideally, carbon-free. And the only resource that fits that bill is nuclear today. Now, maybe there's a Jetsons future and new technology emerges, and that'll be fantastic. But sitting here today, carbon-free, it's largely nuclear. And we're going to have to reconcile with that some form or fashion, and I think we're going to need some new policy, if that's something that interests policymakers and others, to, again, smooth the runway for that inevitable transmission. I'm under no illusion that nuclear is going to be built 5 years from now or even 10 years from now, maybe ever in Rhode Island. I don't know. That's not my decision. But it's going to be a critical resource in the New England mix. It has to be, and that's the only way you're going to achieve, in my opinion, a net zero economy across the region. So what are the things that we can do to start preparing Rhode Island for that conversation? Where are there opportunities to leverage our world-class educational institutions, including my alma mater, URI, to attract some of that R&D dollars that's coming out of Washington? It's one of the resources that they haven't put their, haven't stopped trying to attract investment. And I think there's real opportunity there for Rhode Island to be a leader again, right? Not just on offshore wind, but potentially nuclear energy. If not sited here, perhaps right over the border, but something that can put our folks to work, our skilled tradesmen and tradeswomen, that can attract investment in R&D dollars, and ultimately can help us in our clean energy transition.
One of the things I was thinking of when you were talking, Terry, especially about the good work that's going on at the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. I have this pipe dream that maybe someday might become a reality. One of the problems in this area of green development is financing. These are not I usually like to say, this isn't two guys in a pickup truck coming over to your house on a Saturday afternoon to put a new deck on the backyard. These are multi-billion-dollar intricate processes that are, take years of capital development and years of R&D and multiple layers of a capital stack to actually come from concept to completion. And we actually have a model of how to do that in the labor movement. So back in the 1960s, the president of our national union at the time, George Meany, created with Dr. Martin Luther King this idea of the National AFL-CIO Housing and Investment Trust. And the idea was that the rebuilding cities that had been blighted through urban decay and ignored by the economy, there needed to be some force in the economy that would spur development. And over 50 years, the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust has been involved in multiple billions of dollars of housing development across the country. How cool would it be if we had an environmental investment trust so that we use pension dollars from working people, we use investment from developers, we use whatever capital resources are available so that it's not just a Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank, which has limited capital capacity, but there was something above or in conjunction with that, so that that safe money in a secondary or tertiary form of the capital stack could be available so that it could spur a Rhode Island Energy to take a look at a project where they might not otherwise do. It could spur a Revity into looking at taking a 50 megawatt project and turning it into a 100 megawatt project that's not just about generating solar, but actually, making the next step in the economy. And I think as we're thinking through these things, those are the types of ideas. I mean, the idea that we can just be labor on this side of the table, management on that side of the table, government in between, kind of refereeing disputes, those days are over if we want to meet our goals of decarbonizing our economy. Let me pause here for a minute, see if there's any questions from anyone in the audience, and we'll address them, and then I'll come back to the panel and we'll give you guys the last word. Emily, you have a question.
But just you just down this and in the policy areas again. But she
Wants to go first?
I can start. Thanks, Emily. It's actually an easy one. So one of the things that we've been looking at very aggressively, working with Chris's staff, is taking the governor's lead by example executive order really seriously. And we have been going through the literally hundreds of buildings that we have. Most of them are small, very remote buildings, looking at opportunities to do weatherization, energy efficiency on those buildings. We just completed a very large conversion across the number of facilities of LEDs, LED lighting systems. We've been looking at our fleet, and we have been looking at citing more renewable resources at our different state facilities. And we're building a portfolio, and it's taken time. It takes some patience to navigate through state purchasing and some of the other things that are out there, but it's starting to make a real difference in our bottom line. And I think when people go to the parks, beaches, campgrounds, and they see these, it sends a message. And that's been something that I've been particularly focused on the past couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the things that you mentioned are leveraging with Act on Climate, the Renewable Energy Standard, and those subjects, I mean, certainly in the last couple of years, we've really shifted in terms of launching a lot of programs out of our office in terms of, again, the EV, the e-bike, the heat pumps, the battery storage projects. Director Gray referenced the lead by example efforts. I think we're at about 167, 168 statewide projects in terms of LED lighting, HVAC, heat pumps, EV charging infrastructure, on state properties, working with towns and cities, working with local schools right now. I know that we'll be nearing the completion of energy benchmarking for about 88 state buildings the end of this year. I know here in Providence, I think we are working with over a dozen school buildings with the Providence School District in terms of LED lighting within the classrooms. We, again, are in the hopefully near the finish line in terms of next steps in terms of solar carport, energy storage, and EV charging infrastructure on the Capitol campus within those parking lots. We're currently doing the wonderful interconnection studies right now to figure out the logistics of that. I'm hoping to break ground later this year. So anything that OER has a direct control over or lever in terms of state funding, federal funding, or, again, some of the in-house knowledge to offer towns and cities or school districts, we are trying to max out every resource that we can in terms of advancing the state's clean energy and ultimately a number of the objectives within the Act on Climate.
A lot of the conversations that we have at Climate Jobs, especially during all this uncertainty, are what is working, right? What is not? What do we have? And most importantly, what do we not have? And what are we missing? And that's a question that we've been trying to answer. And we have commissioned a report that should be coming out soon that will hopefully guide this conversation on what we're missing and what we have. And what we heard from previous panelists today and what this report has found is that we have the workforce, right? We have the skills, we have the training infrastructure. We have great plans, but we're missing some seeding and some funding. So this report is hopefully identifying creative alternative funding structures that the state of Rhode Island and their state leadership could hopefully pursue.
Yeah, we're leveraging the authority we already have to conduct competitive procurements for clean energy resources at scale. So we've run multiple rounds of offshore wind procurement. I believe we've just reissued, Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, that the region has reissued a procurement for wind and transmission up in northern Maine that we're a part of, working in collaboration with the State Energy Office. We worked with the General Assembly last session on getting legislation to allow us to competitively procure supplies of nuclear electricity and determining whether we can enter into longer-term arrangements to create some price stability, reduce some price volatility for our customers, and also claim some environmental benefits in line with the Act on Climate and potentially the renewable energy standard. Within our own business, again, getting back to affordability, and we're also leveraging competitive processes as a company. So whether it's, for our equipment, whether it's for electricity supply, we're leveraging the benefits of competition. We have some of our programs, state mandates that support distributed generation, also leverage competition. And we've done those large-scale procurements without state mandate. And again, this is a utility company that wants to help the state get to where it wants to go, but to do so safely, affordably, and reliably.
Nick, you want to have anything to add?
No, I don't think so. It was a great question, Emily, but I think everybody answered it.
We have time for just a last statement from each one of the members of the panel. So in a minute or less, if there's one thing that you could take away or ask the audience to take away from our discussion here today, what would that be in terms of what Rhode Island has faced over the last 18 months and what we see in the future? And we'll start with Nick and we'll work our way down.
Yeah, I think that we need to regain as an industry and as advocates the confidence of our convictions in this industry, in this world. I think a lot of us got really comfortable during the Biden administration that we had won and we were right and we are the future, and we need to pick ourselves back up off the mat, dust ourselves off, and remember that we are right when we say renewable energy is the future of electricity generation. Taking things out of the ground and setting them on fire to create electricity for any number of reasons is not the future of electricity in this world, I would say. So we leave this great week that has been put together, and just hopefully it's a good reminder that we are correct when we say that renewable energy, be it solar, be it wind, be it nuclear, clean energy, geothermal, whatever form you want to take, that is the future, and ultimately it will prevail as the best idea for how we power our grid moving forward.
Harry?
I think it's no surprise to this audience that it's quite clear from this panel and from what everybody reads in the news every day that Rhode Island is in the middle of a good old-fashioned street fight. We got dragged to the courts for offshore wind. We're seeing our federal structure take a complete 180. Programs and funding we thought we could count on are being rolled back, delayed, and canceled. And in times like that, it's easy to say, right, like, let's step back, let's retreat, let's let this storm pass. But I don't think that's the answer. I think it's a time to step forward. I think it's a time to say, or decide rather, who we are as Rhode Islanders, to say we're going to stand on what we're demanding our clean energy transition looks like. And like I said, we have the workforce to do it. We have that momentum. We just have to be a little bit more creative. And I think we're all going to get there together.
It's certainly been a challenging 16 plus months with this new administration at times, but ultimately we just kind of keep grinding along in terms of obviously Revolution Wind. We started that process back in 2018. We are going to get across that finish line later this year when that system goes fully operational, and that's going to have a significant impact on the state's energy portfolio and just in terms of emission reductions. and then ultimately all the federal funding that has been secured. And again, OER works around the clock to make sure that as much money goes out the door. And proud to say that most of the things happening in Rhode Island with those federal dollars, most times Rhode Island's going to be the first state in New England to launch the programs and the first states to complete the projects.
Yeah, I want to basically echo that same sentiment. I mean, I think our biggest enemy right now is getting too cynical. And if we look too much at the federal government, we're going to see a lot of bad things happening. And I think what we need to do is focus locally. Like you've heard, we've got an amazing workforce that's been developed over time that's ready to take us to the next level. We've got a lot of solid foundational programs that have been built and proven to work. We just need to keep the progress moving, maybe at a slower pace, but still keep moving in the right direction. And I think if you look closer to home, there's a lot of positive things happening.
I'm not usually known among my family and friends as a glass half filled guy, but I have to be honest. I am at the moment. You know, despite all the challenges we face that have been talked about all throughout the day, there's real opportunity for the state to continue to drive beneficial investments in clean energy resources that move the needle for our environmental goals, but also help put people to work, attract capital, raise tax revenue, and ultimately, hopefully, help control energy affordability for everyone. And so I'm encouraged by conversations, some of the legislation we've seen this session. Whether it's thermal networks, whether it's utilities' role in generation and helping the state achieve its climate mandates. There's real opportunity there. Tools that this state controls that doesn't necessarily depend upon Washington that we can move on. And so as I said at the beginning, I just want to reiterate. Ours is a company that wants to be part of that conversation, that wants to do some of the heavy lifting with the state and get it to where it wants to go. And so I am optimistic that through the end of this legislative session and going to head to the next one, that there's plenty of opportunity for all of us to achieve those end goals that I think we all agree to, even if sometimes that road twists and turns a bit.
Well, great. Thank you. And an hour goes by pretty quick when you have a panel like this. So let's give everyone a hand here for taking part. And thank you, everyone, for being here and for watching online. Thank you very much.